Did it strike a chill into your heart to hear the Prime Minister say that there should be a decriminalisation of not paying up? Do you think it's the beginning of something sinister?
Actually, I do. I also believe the BBC needs reforming and it needs to change and evolve. But we are in danger of losing it as we have known it for all our viewing and listening lifetimes. It is hugely valued throughout the world. It is a wonderful example of soft power. I know because I've worked all over the world. I've risked my life for it. I think it is in danger now of virtual elimination, as it never has been all the time I worked for it and since.
But is it becoming anachronistic in the sense that most people consume most of their content now through streaming services, Netflix, through Apple, through whatever it may be, Amazon? This is the new way that young people in particular consume their content. The idea of the taxpayers being threatened with criminality if they don't pay up to a state broadcaster, for want of a better phrase, does seem in the new landscape of television watching to be a strange thing.
I don't see it as a state broadcaster. I see it as a national broadcaster. The election results, for instance, the big national occasions. Who do people turn to? So do we now cut it, almost eliminate it as part of the national conversation? But I knew this was going to happen because it's a particularly nasty election campaign. I'm in MP once, and the people I know in the House say they've never met such a nasty campaign. It was bound to end up with attacks on the BBC, which, as far as I can see, are coming equally from the left.
OK, well, let's get the other side here. I mean, I love the BBC. I tease them and we take them to task over stuff, but I agree with a lot of what Martin says. It's a fantastic organisation.
You need them, don't you?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And when you're in America, by the way, right now, you realise how desperately America needs something like the BBC. You know, an impartial organisation which is funded in the way it does, I think is an impressive thing. The problem is, like I said, young people in particular are like, well, hang on, I have to pay all these subs to all these things because I want to. And Boris Johnson's argument will be, why can't we just ask the public, if they like it that much, to pay a subscription?
And, you know, even though it pains me to agree with Boris Johnson on this, I think that, you know, the BBC, first of all, I don't think that the BBC is impartial, and I think that's a problem that we've seen that's arisen from the election from, like Martin so rightly said, quite a nasty election campaign. And I think the BBC has proved, in fact, that it isn't as impartial as it would like to be.
Why do you think it isn't impartial?
Because I think that there's not enough diversity within the BBC, and perhaps that's a different conversation. But I think if you...
Political diversity?
Absolutely. You know, from the people that are within the BBC, from a top-down effect. You know, we know who's at the top of the BBC, and a lot of people that complain that the BBC, or who are outside of London, see it as quite London-centric in the way that the news...
You also, you can shoot...
Hang on. It's interesting you say that, because Hugh Edwards, of course, the anchor of the BBC's overnight political coverage, said that he got attacked from both sides, all sides, for not being impartial. And, of course, it's a sort of badge of impartiality if you're getting attacked by all sides for being politically partial. Whereas if you were only getting criticised from one side or the other, then I would accept your criticism that it is not impartial.
I mean, I think if you really talk to people within and without the BBC, people who work there and people who watch it from all over the country, they see the BBC as being quite London-centric. And I think that that is a problem that comes from the people who are within the BBC and the people that work there. However, when it comes to talking about whether we should have a licence fee or not, I don't think it's something that should be imposed upon people. I mean, young people barely watch the BBC now. Licence fees have gone down 37,000 between the year 2018 to 2019, 37,000 less people feeling that they need a TV licence. And people, young people especially, are consuming the BBC less across the board.
Martin,
TV,
that is
online.
definitely a big
on this issue, Martin, of impartiality. I mean, the BBC, it seems to me, it is broadly impartial. I think Sky News is, for example, as well, broadly impartial. The problem the BBC has, you could, and you know this, you could shoot a harpoon around the BBC newsroom and not hit a Tory voter. I mean, there aren't many Tories working at the BBC. It is a liberal organisation, and most of the people who work there have a liberal mindset. Is that problematic in terms of decision-making, choices that editors make and so on?
I don't see it as an issue. There's been a steady influx from the political offices round in Millbank and so on to the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson had a press advisor who was from the BBC. David Cameron, the former editor of the 10 o'clock news. Andrew Neil is Andrew Neil a lefty? He certainly is not. No, it's not. It's easily caricatured. I'd be interested to know on which side you think the BBC is biased politically.
I mean, I think actually that yes, there is perhaps a real liberal lean within the BBC, within a lot of the broadcasting that we do see, and that suits a lot of people. That suits me, to be fair. But I don't think
aren't
that
the attacks on the BBC's impartiality actually a way to soften up getting rid of the licence fee? I mean, I think that's probably what people are concerned about. And if you did get rid of the licence fee, what would you do in order to fund the BBC?
I think perhaps the BBC needs to go in the way that other services are. You know, Netflix.
Well, listen,
Apple TV,
everyone on Twitter
services.
here, Martin, it's very interesting.
Hang on, just let her
Well,
finish.
on that point, I'm going to make the point.
Can we just let Ashwa finish her point?
Because the BBC was brought in at a time where we didn't have such a wide scope of TV that we have now. It was brought in years and years ago, and you know, it was part funded by the government. We didn't have all these streaming services, and we didn't have as much choice as we did. And I don't think that the paying for the BBC should be imposed on
Well, this
people.
is the point.
It should be something that people
This is the point they're
should be able
making.
to choose.
A lot of
like
people,
we choose Netflix,
right.
we choose Apple TV.
So this is what
Amazon.
Rachel on Twitter. I pay Sky TV, I pay Netflix, I pay Amazon Prime, but these are out of choice. I'm forced against my will to pay the BBC licence fee. Gary on Twitter, scrap it. It's absurd in 2020. We're forced to pay for a service. Others saying, why on earth would it be a criminal offence to be forced to pay for something like this when we voluntarily pay for subscriptions? So this is the argument, Martin, that's gathering momentum, particularly amongst young people who have grown up watching content through subscriptions that they voluntarily pay. Their argument is, why should we have to be involuntarily paying for the BBC?
Piers, you've just got a wonderful and well-deserved new contract. I assume you're not doing this for nothing.
No.
It's being paid for by somebody.
Yeah.
It's just a different funding model.
But it's not being paid for, my salary is not being paid for by the British public. It's being paid for by advertisers. So it's a different dynamic. The BBC problem, as it's always been in terms of the criticism it gets, is that the taxpayer, the British taxpayer, the public, the pensioners, they pay for the BBC. And young people, I think, is the real problem. Young people have grown up in a different environment where they don't just have 4 channels, they have 500 channels, and they can choose which ones they want to pay to watch under subscription. Boris Johnson says the BBC setup is anachronistic, but actually they ought to become like a Netflix, where if you genuinely supply good enough content, people will pay their £8-9 a month. I mean, why can't the BBC go that way?
The sad truth is the BBC is independent of the government until such time as it is not. It has lost 3 directors general over the years who fell out with the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister with them. And now I see the attack being renewed much more ferociously than ever before. And if it's gone, if it's marginalised, then you know what it's like in America. Do we want a tiny PBS on the side? No, we want to...
No, and I agree with that point. I actually totally agree with it. I think it would be a great shame if we lost the BBC. But I do think that the BBC has to evolve and it has to reflect, I think, people's changing habits. And, you know, this idea of decriminalising it, it might be unpopular at the BBC and it might lead to less people paying the licence fee. But I don't think young people are going to be threatened with imprisonment as to whether they pay for it. And that's going to be an issue for the BBC to deal with.
Martin Afward, great to talk to you this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Let us know your thoughts about the BBC. I mean, you know, we all watch it, we all enjoy it. I've enjoyed the BBC for many decades. It would be a tragedy if we lost it. But in what form?
Enjoyed the BBC as well.
You prefer working there, didn't you?
I love wherever I work, but it was good to me.